Things between Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez aren't the best at the moment, and some of the Dutchman's comments might actually leave a bad taste in his teammate's mouth. Seems like after winning his second F1 championship, he's firing remarks left and right. In today's video, we'll be talking about all that Verstappen had to say to Sergio Perez and much more. Let's get started. First up, here's what you need to know. In a recent interview, Verstappen made some comments regarding his Red Bull teammate, and it wasn't just him. He also managed to pass a snide comment at the former Mercedes driver. Verstappen's off-season seems to be pretty fun, especially after his second championship. Now, while the season was exceptionally successful for the 25-year-old, it's a commonly known fact that Sergio Perez had to sacrifice quite a lot. One particular race that comes to mind is the one in Brazil last November that really caused their relationship to take a turn for the worse. Yep, we're talking about that unfortunate Grand Prix where Verstappen refused to give up his position for his teammate. And well, this was the case last year, where the Mexican ended up playing a second fiddle to help his teammate win. You remember his efforts in the 2021 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, right? We all saw how Perez put up a valiant defense for several laps against Sir Lewis Hamilton, which helped Verstappen a great deal. And Max thinks Perez just needs to get used to how things are, because sometimes you just can't help it. Now that sounds like something that won't really sit well with Sergio Perez. Following up, here's what Verstappen said. So we know that pretty much every team has a number one driver that they mostly focus their resources on, but it's never stated outright. But the thing is that sometimes we can easily see who the priority is for a particular constructor. Now, many know that big-time constructors such as Mercedes or even Red Bull have clear number two drivers. And while the bond between these two drivers might be a bit rocky, we see them often compromising for the greater good. This basically means that the number twos often end up staying behind, and Verstappen thinks that's exactly how things are supposed to be. He said, "You just have to accept that the driver next to you is just a little bit better. That's okay. That can happen." This was actually aimed at Valtteri Bottas, who served as the second driver next to Lewis Hamilton in Mercedes. The Finnish driver ended up winning only 10 races in his 5 seasons with the team. At the start, it seemed that Bottas was really going to put up a fight and make Hamilton work hard for the points, but that didn't last for long. We saw Bottas shrink the gap to 58 points in his freshman year, but that was his best performance ever. In 2021, the gap was at its widest, 161.5. While talking about his performance, Verstappen said that Bottas starts again every year, but it takes him a few races to realize that it's not his year again. But all wasn't a loss. The Finn still managed to get podiums, win a few races, and take pole positions. Next up, here's more on a second driver's role according to Verstappen. Verstappen thinks that it's time co-drivers accept their role in the team. In his interview, he mentioned that if they weren't ready to accept their place, their careers would end prematurely. He said that it was a good thing that Bottas came to terms with his role in the team, since it allowed him to have pretty good seasons, at least better than any other number two driver. After this, the Red Bull champ took a jibe at his teammate, saying some drivers can't accept their place, and then it goes completely wrong. He continued by saying that such drivers don't survive very long. Now, he might not have stated it outright, but it's pretty obvious he was talking about Sergio Perez, his Red Bull teammate. Verstappen went on to say that such drivers don't survive long in the race, and that it was important for them to accept their role, since they didn't live in a fairy tale world. Sounds a bit harsh, doesn't it? Well, we definitely can't even imagine the sort of reaction Perez had when he heard this for the first time. Moving on, what is Verstappen going on about? So, these veiled insults obviously originated somewhere, and seeing that it's Max Verstappen, and he hardly opens his mouth to take digs at other players except maybe Hamilton, then we've got to assume that it's serious. You remember the Brazilian Grand Prix, where Sergio Perez was naive enough to assume that he'd get some brotherly behavior from his teammate, who'd let him pass and finish second in the Drivers' Championship. Of course, Perez felt betrayed when this incident took place, and to be very honest, we were all a bit shocked too. You see, Checo never defies team orders to help Verstappen win, even when he's only being used as a pawn. But this time around, the team had explicitly ordered Max to let him pass, and the young driver decided against it. What's crazy is that Max had already gotten his second world champion title by then, so this race wasn't going to affect him in any way. But he didn't let Perez pass, and when he was later asked about it, he said he'd already told the team about it last summer. He also mentioned that his reasons were clear and that he stood by them. Well, we can only imagine what these reasons were, and hope that they were good enough to break little Perez's heart. Let's see what Perez felt about his teammate's decision. Now, if we say that Perez was annoyed, that would be the understatement of the year. The man was extremely extremely furious, to say the least, and he let everyone know what he was thinking at the time. Perez said that these actions showed the real version of Verstappen. He even said that the Dutchman's 2 championships were actually owed to him, and that this reaction was beyond him. But fortunately for the team, the 2 players have since buried the hatchet. The team has also tried very hard to drive the point home that things are back to normal at home. That's all we have for Verstappen and his not-so-veiled thin jibe at Sergio Perez. Now let's move on. Let's see why the 2 Red Bull drivers ditched the FIA awards ceremony. The year 2022 was a pretty good year for the team, since they managed to hit the F1 double. Max Verstappen secured his Drivers' Championship win in the Japanese Grand Prix, and the team finally got to hold the Constructors' Trophy. Just a reminder, the last time they got to do so was in 2013. Anyway, what's interesting is that the Red Bull team principal, Chris Horner, ended up sharing the stage with the FIA president, Mohammed Ben Sulayem, in what can only be described as an awkward moment. For some reason, Ben Sulayem thought that as Horner was receiving the Constructors' Trophy, it would be the perfect moment to clarify the regulations used in the controversial race at Suzuka. And it seems like things got a little bit too weird for him and the team, since later on, Horner, along with Perez and Verstappen, were seen backstage trying to keep up with the 2022 FIFA match going on at the time. Following up, FIFA over FIA. The trio from Red Bull was seen pretty engulfed in watching a FIFA World Cup match from their phone's screen. Rather than being an active part of the awards ceremony, they were supposed to be attending. They were actually filmed watching Croatia and Brazil's quarterfinal penalty shootout. Now that was one nerve-wracking game. We can't blame them for being unable to stay away. But what's super interesting about this is that none of the members of the trio are even remotely linked to Brazil or Croatia. But hey, we know what you're thinking. Horner, Verstappen, and Perez watching a match together? Hallelujah! This just happened to be the first time the 3 of them seem to be enjoying each other's company, at least since the Brazilian Grand Prix. Well, maybe that's the connection they all share to one of the competing countries. We're going to be honest, it sure is a bit of a stretch, but still, it is a welcome sight to see them getting along after the entire debacle. Lastly, is Perez's relationship with Verstappen on the rocks? So things don't really look good between Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez. In fact, they look stressful at best, especially considering the fact that Max ended up sending some thinly veiled jibes Perez's way. We honestly don't know how he reacted to it all, but it's safe to assume that it wasn't good at all. It's hard to expect him to be reasonable, at least not after the Dutchman said that he needed to accept that he was better than him and that Sergio was basically a pawn in Verstappen's game. So no matter how cozy they seemed at the FIA awards, and even if they would much rather spend their time watching a FIFA match rather than pay attention to the awards ceremony, it's still evident that there are quite a lot of tensions present between them. What's more is that things don't really seem to be in Checo's favor at the moment. That's right, just recently it was announced that Daniel Ricciardo was joining Red Bull as a reserve driver. Now it's universally known that Ricciardo and Verstappen share a very close bond together. In fact, they also used to be teammates some time ago. So Perez will have to be very careful about how he decides to proceed with things. And recent footage from the ceremony seems to prove this. Despite the fact that his relationship with Max might be at a breaking point, it's important that he remain in everyone's good books, since Ricciardo won't drop a chance of getting back on the grid. That's a wrap for this video, folks. What's your take on Verstappen's comments regarding number 2 drivers? Will Perez ever fit into that role? Let us know what you think in the comments down below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more awesome videos like this.